fight. We don't have to kill. Everybody in the whole wide world really just needs to chill. No, we don't have to fuss, no, we don't have to fight.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Just Chill with Oliver George. This is episode 56, and I'm very excited about my guest as well as our new setup, which includes these new chairs, these new mics. I think I just said nude mics. These new mics, the new sound system, which is just so far superior to what we had going on before. But before we get to the guest, I do want to remind you, if you're watching on YouTube right now and you would prefer audio only, you can get that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and many other places like that. If you are listening to me on one of those, however, you can please come check out the show on YouTube and subscribe while you're there if you wouldn't mind. We are very close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and I'm very, very stoked about that. So if you've supported the show up to this point, thank you so much. Finally, if you want to reach out to me, maybe with a cool guest idea or some general feedback about the show, hit me up at justchillpodcasting@gmail.com. Now, the guest this week is someone who is a very, very funny comedian. He is a staple of the Ottawa comedy community. He is an Indigenous comedian as well, and he was here a week ago.
Before the new equipment.
Yes. So,
which might explain the new equipment.
do you have deja vu as well right now?
I have deja vu. It's all coming back to me. Yeah, it's very familiar looking. Familiar feel that the chairs are a little more comfortable. I'll give you that.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that feedback about the chairs, yes. Dawn actually came last week. We started recording. We had some audio issues, so we scrapped it. And it turned out to be kind of a blessing in disguise because now we've got a far superior setup and more comfortable chairs, which you helped me carry in last week, actually.
Yeah, it's an honor being a guest on his show.
Yeah, you get to move help the me furniture. Lift heavy shit.
That's right.
I was a little bummed because we had a really great 20-minute chat, so I'm going to try and reiterate a lot of that. I believe it started with you just telling us a lot about your heritage. I was very curious about all of that. Your Ojibwe, you were telling me about some of the different spellings. You were telling us about the treaties. You knew a ton about that. So, I don't know. Do you remember a lot that you would want to reiterate from last week? Because
we can sort of see what roads it takes us down. We can rev it back up a bit again. I am happy to be here. I'm glad to know that there were 55 people ahead of me that you wanted first. So it's nice. 56 is good. But I get 2 episodes, right? We did that half one last time.
Yes,
so
I have that in the archives. Like
That's
I was
good.
saying.
Good to know. Yeah, no, you were doing some research. You told me last time, and it came up about my Anishinaabe. I was saying that's what we call ourselves. Ojibwe is the term you often hear, and I always like people just relax about terminology and ask. Feel free to ask. Don't worry about looking dumb, because we call ourselves Anishinaabe, but my reserve is the Ojibways of Onegaming, so it's not like
it's not
I'm going to get all offended if you call me Ojibwe. And in the States, Chippewa. It's really the same thing. I got cousins in Minnesota, across the border, the medicine line as we call it. So we call ourselves Anishinaabe, but I mean that there's a lot of terms out there. And my reserve, a Treaty 3 reserve, northwestern Ontario. It's near Kenora. Treaty 3, we were talking, Treaty 3, we were talking about that, was signed in 1873 at a place called Northwest Angle, which is still there. All the Anishinaabe leadership at the time gathered, had a few days of negotiations with the Crown. And the point I always make about the treaties was, what's really interesting is, for Treaty 3, the leadership at the time hired interpreters and note takers who could speak both languages, because our people were speaking Anishinaabe-Moan is what we call our language. Anishinaabe-Moan is the name of the language. And they, of course, were, there was the Crown was speaking English, the Crown's representatives. And what was really interesting is, so we hired our own note takers just to make sure that the understanding was clear. And when you look at the notes of the discussions, it's very much about a nation-to-nation relationship that we were going to share. We were going to recognize each other as nations, but the treaties, which I think Canada should be really proud of, we weren't really founded in bullets and bloodshed. It was really these agreements which were really about peaceful coexistence. They were like sharing, mutual respect, mutual recognition, partnership, not giving up the land, but saying, let's share it. We could, there's enough here that we can share and sustain for future generations. And then that's what the notes that our note takers took reflect. When you actually read the treaty, which of course was written in English, and if you look at the signatures from the Anishinaabe leaders, that they're clan symbols, because we weren't writing English cursive. But when you read the treaty, the text was clearly just written beforehand. It just says, for each family of 4, you will receive X number of hectares, and you will have like rights to the just the surface minerals, things like that. So, we always talk about the spirit and intent of the treaty, which is what we understood it to mean. And, there's always been these people who will say, it's elders, it's these old men just handing stories down, and of course they get lost. But we were talking, when you look at Treaty 9 in James Bay, forget my own note takers, they found the diary of the commissioner who negotiated the treaty, and even his own diary says, yes, we promised them this, that they weren't giving up their land, blah, blah, blah. So even he was saying we were kind of doing some sharp dealings there in terms of what we were agreeing to. So I don't know. We always talk about, a big part of the solution going forward, or reconciliation is the word of the day, is getting back to that original relationship, which was partnership, mutual respect, not, we're going to tell you how you have to run your lives and forget about your languages and your governance systems and your legal systems. No, it's all going to become like the way Canada tells you to do it. And that's been a big part of the problem, because Canada's policy has just been a disaster, and it has been very much one size fits all, imposed. This is how you're going to do it. We don't care how you used to do it. So there you go.
We're caught up. Yeah,
we're done. Now you know what to do.
Well, I like what you said about feeling free to ask about terminology, because we talked about last time just the general terminology for Indigenous people and what's the right thing to say. Is it Native? Is it First Nations? We even talked about how some people still use Indian, which seems really kind of ridiculous in 2021.
Well, at one time it's been all of the above, right? I mean, it's and like you say, Indian. And I know some of my own people who will get offended, like that's, we're not Indians, that's, Columbus, was lost, that kind of thing. Yeah. But we have our own organizations, the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs, the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians. These are our own organizations that still use it. Up until, the 80s, the Assembly of First Nations was the National Indian Brotherhood, which I love. Not only does it say Indian, it says Brotherhood. Are women involved?
Yeah, it's like a fraternity or something.
Exactly, yeah. So, but having said that, I mean, I always say, so right now, the umbrella term, if you're talking First Peoples anywhere, is Indigenous. That's a catch-all term. In Canada, the Indigenous people would be the Métis, the Inuit, and First Nations. And First Nations is a very broad term. Like I say, I'm Anishinaabe, but I'm Ojibwe, but there's Mohawk, there's Cree, there's Dene, there's Haida. There's like more than 50 original nations that were in this land. And so First Nations itself is about as useful and useless as the term Europeans. You can use it and it means something,
it's
but
too broad.
It's like if you just said, "Oh, I'm from Europe," you'd probably ask, "Well, where in Europe?" And that's the
can you
same
be more
thing.
specific,
Exactly.
please? Yeah.
Because and in the same way, when you think of the original nations of that were here pre-contact, it was very much. It's a bad analogy, but it was like Europe. I mean, like the Spanish. How different they are from the Poles or the Portuguese or the English.
Yeah,
like
huge
same thing here.
differences.
Yeah, huge, because it's a huge country, right? So the way of life, the ways of life are different. So when you say First Nations, again, no one generally gets offended, but always be specific if you can. So rather than say, "Oh, you're First Nations," you can find out, "Oh, you're Mi'kmaq or you're Haida or you're Anishinaabe or Ojibwe," in my case. So that's always the first preferred, is just specifically who it is you're talking to. But if you do need these umbrella terms, they're out there. And we won't even get into Indigenous people and Indigenous peoples. That's kind of like getting into the offside rules in hockey. I mean, we can. I'm just saying, there's just so many layers just to the terminology. And like I say, I try to be open, because some people, I just find, again, Indigenous people are kind of starting to lose patience with having to educate settlers. So, someone will be like, "Don't ask me, read it or something." I don't mind. And, again, if some people, I can sometimes understand the frustration, but I just think that's the way we learn. And if someone's willing and interested, let's use that opportunity to build some understanding. Yeah.
Why do you think that they haven't stopped using Indian in some of the organizations that you're speaking of?
I just think it's been around so long, and they may change, and they could. I guess some of them maybe just have a comfort level with the name. What's interesting is the regional group in Saskatchewan, FSIN, which used to stand for, up until about 2 years ago, the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. They kept FSIN, but now it's the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. So they went for that
clever.
sort of indigenous, like they did the broader
Change
term.
the acronym a bit.
But they,
yeah.
So they kept the letters, but yeah, so they took Indian out of there. Some may, we'll see. There's still, groups that use Aboriginal, and that's not necessarily tremendously offensive. It's just sort of, it's gone to Indigenous now because that's, at the United Nations, and they have the Indigenous Peoples Caucus and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That's kind of what made Indigenous more the term of comfort that people are using now. So that, it's funny getting into this because it just shows, like sometimes how difficult the conversations can be, that you even need to just start with terminology, let alone what's our history and what are the issues and how do we go forward. You just got to get past that terminology to get going. So it's, it's not always easy conversations, but there's a lot there. That's why I say I don't think people should get too hung up on the terminology because there's much deeper stuff, you want to get into.
Starting the discussion is always the most important thing,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you were saying that we should be proud of the treaties because in my mind, even if the heart was in the right place with the discussions, clearly they didn't follow through. So I don't know. That doesn't make me feel proud of my ancestors or whatever.
Well, I take the point, and I wouldn't say let's be proud of the written text of the treaty that talks about all these sort of administrative.
It makes them sound like con men. What happened?
But if you look at this, well, yeah,
they ultimately were
exactly.
yeah,
exactly.
Snaked it away.
Yeah, but it's really that spirit and intent, and we would say be proud of the treaty relationship. And of course, we're talking about how we saw it and understood it, because it really was about welcoming each other. The Haudenosaunee, the Mohawks, have a 2-row wampum, which is a symbol of, if you look at it, it's a beaded wampum. It's 2 canoes going down the same river, but they're each in their own canoe. And the whole idea was we can travel side by side, but we don't interfere with each other. So, that's a good example of a...
what is a Wait, what is it called? Sorry?
It's a wampum belt, which is,
okay.
it's like a beaded, and it's like hard beads, almost like shells.
Okay.
And it's if you can imagine a belt, but it's rows of beads, and then it's got some sort of like strings at the end. And I could not do justice to it, but if you read up on it, or if you go to like Akwesasne somewhere nearby and you can look at them, the design is fairly I don't want to say simple,
but straightforward.
It's straightforward, but it's so deep. Like there's a meaning in why why the shells are so many apart and things like that.
That's very cool.
It's very rich. Yeah, it's just like you can sort of clearly see what it means, but then there's a rich. It goes deeper too. So it's really interesting to have someone explain it what it all means. But that really is the image. These 2 canoes side by side. We can travel together, but we don't get in each other's way, and you don't try to steer my boat, and I don't try to get into your boat unless we're invited. But that was the that image, I think, really
minimize conflict.
Says a lot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I wanted to say that I did mention last time that I had found in my research, and I thought was really interesting, was that the natives didn't sort of view land in the same way as this thing to be owned and property, and it was more like sunlight or air or these other essential parts of the earth, So I guess the concept was lost on them a bit in the way that the Europeans viewed owning a piece of land,
Yeah, and I think, that's probably why those treaty discussions were a little difficult at times. I'm sure they were difficult in a lot of ways, but sometimes there were just concepts that didn't work. And I think you nailed it. It's the difference between property and territory, because some people would say, "Oh, well, the natives didn't believe in owning land, so why did they have a problem giving it up? They never said they owned it." But we had had wars with other nations prior to contact over territory and boundary. Boundaries were changing all the time, and the Cree up around the James Bay region, their families have trap lines, which was their territory, and this was a community, so they weren't fighting amongst themselves, but it was very clear that this was my area. So it just wasn't a sense of I own this and this is for me. A lot of our folks will say, you only own the land up until the second you're born. And once you're born, it's then your job to take care of it for the next generations. And that's why everything we look at 7 generations ahead, and we learn from 7 generations past, but you're always making decisions based on what's going to be good 7 generations.
How did they come to that number 7, do you think?
7 I know for Anishinaabe and for a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but for other Indigenous groups and First Nations, 7 is it's a number that comes up a lot. Like, for example, we talk about the 7th fire prophecy, and each fire was essentially a generation, and we're kind of in the 7th fire right now, and this is when things will change. Like there will be the original times, then there will be times of hardship, and the 7th fire is the time when that we're going to transition, and it could go either way, and it's up to us to try to make it go the best way. But it's also the number 4 as well. Is like if you're Christian, 3 of course is a big number. There's a lot of 3s in Christianity. In our spirituality, 4 comes up a lot, and that kind of makes sense because there's 4 seasons. We saw 4 directions. There's even 4 kinds of drums that are used in ceremony. There's 4 kinds of water. A
little off topic, but I think that in Chinese culture, 4 is like a bad omen. If people have told me it means death or some sort of negative thing.
Right.
It's interesting just to see the different cultures will have different meanings for values.
Well, and exactly. And getting away from numbers, some of the elders in our community, because contact wasn't that long ago when you think of generations. It wasn't sort of like 1,000 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so there are stories brought down, and one of the stories I've heard is some of the original discussions with the Jesuits who first came over, because of course these were, their mission was to go into these sort of, tough lands and, territories and try to, of course, convert everybody.
Yeah.
But some of these early discussions, amongst the Jesuits, some of our elders will talk about the stories they heard from their great-great-grandparents about how they would meet each other, and they would, the Jesuits would be like, oh, and like if you convert to this way, when your spirit leaves, you'll go to heaven and you'll sing God's praises. And our people were like, can I hunt there? No. You sing God's praises. Oh, will my animals be there? No. It's you sing God's praises, worship God, and they're like, okay, so why am I converting to this again? Like it just didn't sound it
didn't compute really.
It didn't sound like something that was really all that desirable or fun, So
can I ask you, and maybe this is different for different First Nations groups, but what is their sort of main view on the afterlife?
Well, it's interesting. 2 things. I think the first big point is a lot of the, we call it the Medewan. That's the Anishinaabe spirituality. My father, if he was here, he could just, like, he's immersed in the Medewan. I am nowhere near as knowledgeable as he is about it. But the first thing is, a lot of the Medewan and the teachings are about the here and now. It really is about living this life. It wasn't, and whereas in Christianity, and this is not a criticism, and I probably don't, I can't speak to Christianity probably as much as I can't speak to the Medewan. But, it is very much about doing things now so that, you're a good person and you go on to like heaven or whatever your concept of heaven is.
Yeah.
For us, our spirituality teachings were much more focused on this life, and it wasn't really so much about what happened. That you do these things to then get into this afterlife. I mean, you do these things because this is the way you keep the circle strong. This is the way you keep the community strong. This is the way you keep everyone strong, but by doing good, decent things, living in a good way. But there is, if you go to a traditional funeral, and I've been to a few, there are instructions given to the departed about what's going to happen. And they, there are 4 levels in the cosmos, basically, that you will then go through, and there's instructions you have to give to the spirit, because there are points where they can get stuck along the way if they don't follow the instructions. And we talk about going across the shore. That's kind of the last stage, as you go across the shore to the other side, and that's where you'll see all your family and friends, your animals that you love, basically everyone you loved. Yeah. You know what? And in some of the teachings, and you can imagine how this would have freaked out the Jesuits, you get across the lake, you see what's coming towards you is almost like a huge log, like it looks like a huge log on the river, but it's a serpent, it's a snake that then takes you across.
Oh, wow.
We didn't have that Garden of Eden story or anything like that. So, but you can imagine the Jesuits' heads must have exploded.
They associated snakes
they
with
would have thought,
sin
this is the devil's way, right?
Yeah.
This is when of course this was just one of we look at I don't want like again I'm not immersed in it, but we just look at all creation like we're the 2-leggeds. we're not above creation. And even then, like in terms of race, it's not about, black, white. It's like we're the two-leggeds. We're all one part of creation. There's the four-leggeds. There's the ones who fly, the ones that crawl. So it's all part of creation, and we're all connected. And it's not like, we didn't see ourselves as above that. In fact, we saw ourselves as part of it. And you can imagine trying to live in Canada, 1,000 years ago, when we didn't have the sort of tech we have now, you really needed to respect creation and the environment, and
especially stuff that can kill you.
Yeah, especially stuff that can kill you. Yeah, if you don't know what you're doing,
that's one thing I've always noticed about Native American culture is that animals seem to be very respected, and a large part of that. The beliefs, from what I know, just from a distance, you always see the artwork always has, orcas and other animals, bears and stuff like that. So I was expecting maybe that had something to do with the religious aspects of that culture.
Well, yeah, and it's really like it's more not to get too picky, but it's more the spirituality of it. And it really is, we're all connected, and everything is here for a purpose, and not just for our purpose, not just for us to to use it, but everything has a role. And it's the kind of stuff that over the last 20 years has become really commonsensical now in Western thinking. Like, oh, right, if you wipe things out over here, it affects things over there, or if you wipe out a species, that affects all these other species. Yeah. Everything is connected. It's not just sort of a First Nation sort of, whatever abstract view. I mean, it's just we're seeing that this is real.
Cause and effect. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, but I like that vibe of almost like the Force that you also see in Buddhism a lot, where everything is so connected, and it seems like they have a similar focus on living in the present. And putting a focus on the life and the moment you're in right now. That's a big part of Buddhism, and meditation. And
that's right. Well, this has nothing to do with being First Nations, but I just think Earth, like there is a will to life on this planet. You know what I mean? Everywhere, it's the classic, it's the grass growing through the concrete, or when they found, those vents at the bottom of the ocean floor that are, churning out whatever, these super hot gases and lava basically, and there's life around those things, So, I mean, maybe there's other planets out there that are the same, but man, there is just a will to life on this planet.
Oh, definitely. Always persevere, yeah.
Yeah. Everywhere, the most, the toughest, harshest places, you'll there's something there. There's some kind of vegetation or moss or something.
Yeah, if some place gets destroyed, a couple of years later, you see the weeds cracking through the pavement and stuff. Yeah,
for sure.
One thing I like about Native culture, and I will use the term Indian here because I simply don't know how else to say this, but like the Indian names, where you'll get like runs with wolves or that kind of thing. What is the story behind that? Like, what is the... when do you get that in your life? Is that something that happens with, like when you hit puberty and you're growing up as a man, or
it's going to be different depending which First Nation you're talking about. But for the Anishinaabe, you usually get one when you're born.
Okay.
There's usually a elder or that will have a dream or a vision, and they'll give you your name. But then you can also get them later in life. I've got two.
What are yours, if you don't mind me asking?
Pebam Nagabo and Shonya Gweneb.
What do those mean?
The first one kind of means the one, like we didn't use the word administer, but the one who tends to the conduct and the affairs of the nation. So I always joke that it's like the administrator, right? Like I'm the office worker.
Well, isn't that very relevant to some of the stuff you've accomplished in your life too, right? And working for the AFN and stuff, right?
Well, maybe. Like, I mean, I've never looked at it that way, but yeah, it really is one who tries to help. It doesn't say one who helps, but one who tries to help. And then the other one came more from a vision. Shonya Gweneb means gold feather, and it was a vision of a cloud that looked like a feather. Just sort of like sort of a longer cloud, and with the sun breaking through behind it. So that's where gold feather came from. Interestingly, when I tell some Anishinaabe people, especially people who are learning it now, which I full credit if they're learning the language, but they'll go, Shonya, that means money. And I go, well, that is the word we use for it now, but it's because it means gold. That's how it became money. Yeah, so people think like money feather. Like, no, it's gold feather. But
gold feather or money feather would both be amazing Bond villains.
Well, I was going to say, I think they were, weren't they?
Well, Goldfinger and Money Penny.
Money feather was his Indigenous secretary, exactly.
That's awesome. we did talk about you growing up in Winnipeg from the age of 5 and on, and how you had gone to it wasn't Catholic school, but
no, it was just a typical
public school.
suburban, public school.
And we talked about how important education is, and the fact that you learned about assholes like John A. MacDonald, I'm sure, but your culture was not being taught at all. And I wanted to kind of ruminate on that a bit.
Yeah, well, that I always think is the big problem. And I always say, well, first of all, of course, there's racism in Canada. There's racism everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
But I just think, like, in Canada, it's there's just a lot more ignorance. And I'm always careful to say, I don't mean that in the pejorative, like you're stupid. I mean, like, people just don't know. And that's a big fault, is the education system didn't teach anyone this stuff. And I know that because I went to a suburban Winnipeg school, and yeah, that was a long time ago, but I'll talk to sometimes university classes, and they may have a bit more knowledge, but clearly they're not getting it. And again, I don't blame them, because I don't expect everyone to run out on their own time and start reading up on, Indigenous history and real Canadian history, if we can call it that. But then the problem is, then there's no understanding. And I always say, I learned that you learned there were people here before the settlers came over, and then Cabot and
Louis Riel, I remember.
Cartier and them. Yeah. Well, then you learn they came over. And then there's 100 years of just what they did and not what First Nations were doing or how they were treating First Nations. Yeah. And then suddenly, boom, fast forward to now, and people will see, like, some of the poverty, or the people living in poor social conditions, or the Indigenous homeless person. Mm-hmm. And without that knowledge, I mean, again, I can't blame people if all they conclude is, well, I guess, they just can't make it in the modern world. Their ways just, aren't taking them forward. When in fact, without getting into all of it, I mean, there was this real brutal attempt, which we're learning more about now, to wipe out and eradicate, Indigenous people, literally, but then also if you get rid of their culture and their languages of anyone, you could be Spanish, you name it,
erasing.
You get rid of that
literally.
identity. Yeah. You get rid of that identity. Like all our songs, stories, our ceremonies, our laws are all in our languages. You get rid of the cultures, like they tried to do at the residential schools, along with the languages. Not only do you get rid of the person, but what we went through for a couple generations was just the profound impacts that has on people and families and communities when you try to do that. It's like someone, it's like if you as an individual were just repeatedly abused for years, and then when that's done, your abuser or someone else says, just get over it.
Yeah, right.
Just
what's up with you? Why can't you
go to university or get a job or something?
Yeah.
Like, come on, man, pull yourself. Like, it's like, yeah, we've all, we fall, we skin our knee. You can get up and get over it. But this is, like I say, this would be like years,
trauma.
Yeah, like generations. And as an individual, just thinking of as an individual, if you were just constantly like has happened to some
we all know that if you're a victim of trauma, that often the cycle will repeat itself when people have children.
Absolutely.
So if that happens for a few generations in a row, you've got people who are never growing up with the proper love because the people that raised them didn't get love. And love is so essential to human existence and to fostering healthy mindsets.
And that's a really good point. For better and for worse, we often learn how to parent from our parents. When you find out people who were abused and then abused their kids, you think, oh, how could they do that? They must know. But I mean, and there's probably 1,000 psychological aspects to it. But it's because you were like brought up unfortunately in an unfortunate way, and that does get passed on. Some people can break the cycle, but you can't just assume everyone should be able to break the cycle. I mean,
how would most anyone fare if their parents were taken away from them and then you were raised by scary people who don't think the way you think and are trying to force you to think the way they think and erase everything that you've basically learned up to that point? Like, all of that just sounds god-awful. And then now we're finding out the extent of the even more horrendous lengths they took that to.
Yeah.
And I know you had mentioned last time that your father went to a residential school. So did that have a big impact on you growing up? Did that trauma, could you feel that sort of from him as a parent?
Yeah, and he was the generation. So, like I always say, it's his story to tell, but he's spoken about it publicly. He's written about it. There's a book of survivor stories that was put out by the Aboriginal Healing Foundation a few years ago. So he's written that. So I'm not I'm only comfortable talking about his story because he's done that. But he was taken when he was 4 years old, too young to go to school, but they were taking all his brothers. So in the cold calculus of the day, it was like, yeah, we may as well take him too, you know. So they took him and his 3 brothers.
I shouldn't say Jesus. Oh my God, that's just a natural reaction. But I'm like, that's the worst name I could say right here.
Well, and you know, not to get depressing, but you know, you're a parent, right? Like, can you imagine? Knock on the door. There's an RCMP officer or 2, some guy from the government, and like, we're taking your kids.
People who are supposed to be protecting the neighborhood.
And I mean, I always say, you know, we got to remember that the children, but you also got to think like just the trauma on the families, like the parents too, because they knew how bad the schools were. It wasn't like they thought they were shipping them off to summer camp. Like, so, you know, you hear the stories about children like being sent to run into the woods or hiding under the beds.
Yeah.
You know, there was no illusion there about what was going on. So I just think as well, I mean, as much as we think of the children and we should, I just always think too, man, for parents, that must have just been terrible having your kids taken away.
Oh God.
But yeah, so he was taken, and yeah, I mean, you know, he sadly experienced a lot of the abuse that you hear about.
Was he ever able to connect with his parents again at a later date or no?
Well, his mother, yes.
Okay.
His father had passed away, but yeah, he connected. His mother was a very strong woman, and he went there for a few years. He went to 2 different residential schools, but one of the ones he went to, you know, when we talk about all the things that are now coming to light, that, by the way, First Nations have known for a long time, just no one really listened, he was at a school called St. Mary's, which about 5 or 6 years ago, it came to light that some of the residential schools, they had done experiments on the students.
Like Nazis.
Well, it was like they realized they did nutrition experiments because they realized this is a perfect control group. You know, we've got 2, you know, we've got one group getting the exact same treatment, so we can like divide them up, or if we'll use this group as the control group and this group to experiment on. So it was nutrition experiments. And he had bad dental health his whole life. In fact, he lost all his teeth at 30. He had dentures at the age of 30. And a lot of this goes back to they were withholding nutrition from certain kids and experimenting with different diets.
At an age where you really need a lot of fortifying
where you need like proper nutrition.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just one of many things that have come to light that, again, most Canadians don't know. And, you know, the only thing I look at, you know, now we've got the Unmarked Graves, which, again, a lot of the First Nations knew they were there.
That's what I was going to ask you. The Unmarked Graves are obviously shocking, but you do mention that the First Nations people were aware of a lot of what was going on. Do you think to this extent, or are they still being like blown away here?
I don't know if they knew to the extent, but they knew. I mean, you know, the most obvious, like, tragic thing was kids who never came home.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was, they ran away, or, you know, maybe.
But going from that to these mass burial sites.
But they knew. And I mean, we're hearing now about, you know, children, because, you know, that was the thing about the schools. I mean, there was so much misunderstanding by some folks. I think some of it was honestly guilt or not wanting to admit that a Canadian government would do this kind of thing. There were so many people who for the longest time, you know, well, they meant well. Like, yeah, they were a little misguided when they set them up, but they meant well, and they didn't. You know, we know now, like, you know, we got to kill the Indian in the child, or Johnny MacDonald. You know, if you look at Hansard, the House of Commons transcripts, you know, saying, you know, as long as the Indian speaks his language and knows his spirituality, even if you give an education, he's still just, you know, a savage with some education. So this was really the attitude, and it really was. It was not for our own good. And the other thing, the way you know it wasn't for our own good was, you know, my father talked about how in the mornings they'd get some basic, you know, reading, writing, some math, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the bulk of the day was the boys were working on the farm or tending the property or doing, you know, repairs. Manual labor,
Yeah.
free manual labor. And the girls were learning how to sew, you know, and do laundry and things like that. So
setting them up to only ever get
they
to
clearly
like here.
were not training the next generation of engineers and artists
it's the next
and
generation
lawyers.
Of janitors
they were training, like your next generation of Well, I don't want to insult anyone's job, but they weren't clearly saying, we're going to give you opportunity now, you know, to be anything you want to be. No, It was really like, you know, you're going to be, you know, working on the farm or something like that. So again, all these things that I used to hear a lot that was really frustrating. You know, they meant well, or they were just trying to give them an education. Or the worst, of course, which I think is, I'm hoping we're hearing, if I hate to look for good things coming out of some of these horrific things like the Unmarked Graves, but I hope I never hear again, because I used to hear this. Oh, my dad got strapped in school, and he didn't ask for compensation or healing or whatever. Like it was just so beyond that. So
yeah, it's next level.
So I hope we. Yeah, I mean, I guess you're probably always going to hear that, and there's probably a generation that is, because there's that Senator Lynn Bayak who there was a lot of good. Even I don't know if you saw the other day, Manitoba, the province of Manitoba, their Indigenous relations person in the provincial government quit because the premier, Brian Pallister, was saying, well, colonization, the people had good intentions who did this. They came here to build. He was basically defending colonization. And so his Indigenous Relations secretary quit. He hired a new one, a fellow named Eric Lajamodia, I believe, who is Métis. And in his opening press conference, first day on the job, and I think it was Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation is the name of the position he got. He was asked about the residential schools, and he said, well, I think the people who set them up were trying to make sure these children got education. Oh, so like God. I say, I thought of that because I was just saying how I hope I never hear that again, but I just heard it the other day. And then the leader of the opposition, Wab Kinew, who was there, and he is a honorary Truth and Reconciliation Commission representative. So he basically has an oath and a duty to speak up when he hears that kind of stuff.
Nice.
Got up at the press conference and just stood right by him and said, you cannot say that.
Yeah.
Like, that is not the case. And he goes, it's not historical revisionism to talk about the truth of these schools. So he kind of schooled them publicly, which was great.
But it shows that rhetoric is still floating
it's
around.
Still there.
I
know. That's why, like I say, I mean, it'll probably be around for a while. It might even be around forever. Again, I don't know if people just, they just can't believe Canada did this, or there's some sort of collective guilt around it. I don't know what it is, but I mean, truth and reconciliation, like the name says, you need truth if you're going to have reconciliation. In fact, you need truth before there's reconciliation.
Yeah. I want to, before I forget, I want to point out that some of the music and stuff that I've found, I mentioned last time, was Willie Dunn is an artist that I've really been loving. He has a song called I Pity the Country, and also a song about Chani Wanjak, which, if you don't know that story, look it up. Gord Downey from The Hip also did a graphic novel and a CD all about that.
Yeah, The Secret Path, yeah.
Yeah, and he had to run away, or he tried to, and obviously didn't make it in the harsh winter. And it's a horrible, sad story, but the song by Willie Dunn is moving. I heard it on the radio just driving home after work one day, and I'm so glad I did, because it's weird. It has like a beautiful, positive sound, melodically speaking, and then the lyrics are just so haunting that it really, oh my God, it just devastates you. But people need to hear it, because, for me, it really started cranking the gears. And not that I didn't care at all anymore, but the more I can expose myself to that kind of stuff, the happier I am to be able to move in that direction,
Yeah, well, and the thing is, too, I mean, art's a great medium, right? Like, like whether it's comedy, whether it's music, I've always felt, that's why artists are so important. And in a lot of movements, like even the civil rights movement in the United States, artists were so important. Part of it is because, and I think, what Gord Downey did in his final concert with The Hip and the Chani Wanjak story, his audience is people, maybe some of them are totally up to speed on Indigenous issues or into it, or are Indigenous themselves. But then there's a lot of people who aren't, but so he can reach those people, or artists or music or comedy. You can reach people, I always think anyone who walks into a lecture on Indigenous issues is probably halfway there anyways. They probably got an open mind. They want to learn. Exactly.
Yeah.
They care. Whereas, art can reach people who may not care, not because they're bad people. It's just not they got a family to raise, and they've got a job, and they like sports, and they're just not into like learning a bunch of history. And I get that. We've all got lives we want to lead. But that's, again, art can play a role in reaching those people and getting them to think, and I think that's really important. I do not approach my comedy in that way, but again, that's another avenue where people can, be exposed to different ideas. And I just think, there's such art can be so potent, especially in getting word out to people who. Well,
it's like you said, everyone learns differently, like you said. So some people, that's how you're going to reach them, through a poem or a song.
And there's so many good, like you say, more. I think more than ever, because Indigenous, young people are the fastest growing population in Canada. Like it's the youngest, fastest growing segment of the population in Canada. So it's no surprise you're seeing a lot more Indigenous artists, and not just traditional music. And traditional music is great. I mean, that's our the original music of this land. But like hip hop, hard rock. You name it. Rolling Stone just had in their Hot issue, they had Crownland, which is that they're not Indigenous, but one of the it's a duo, and one of them is Mi'kmaq, Two Spirit. So you got these bands like it's not just sort of like you got to be into like the powwow trail to hear this stuff.
I love seeing that genre hopping kind of like. I'm trying to think of another example. There's a band called Madas Yahoo. It's a bunch of Jewish guys that play reggae. You know, stuff like that. I mean, I think that's the cool thing about music is it's not, you can't claim this music is only for these people. It's, if you feel it and you can
I'll tell you,
put your soul into it.
I was the age when Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, shortly after NWA, straight out of Compton came out.
Late 80s then,
It would have been late 80s. And I remember thinking, I don't want to sound like I was super prescient, but I remember thinking, I thought, you know what? Our youth are going to be all over this stuff because they were growing up. I mean, they were the generation that came through wanting to sort of reclaim and revitalize and be proud of who they were after so many years of people feeling ashamed about being Indigenous. They wanted to be proud, and so Public Enemy with their political and radical and sometimes wrong but hard political stance, and
Rage Against the Machine is very similar.
And then NWA with the whole sort of we're going to celebrate being being thugs basically or gangsters. I just thought both those things. I thought, man, this is going to pull a lot of our youth in, and it did, and they really and I think
Tribe Called Red.
Yeah, Tribe Called Red, and there's a whole explosion of Indigenous hip hop artists and doing their own thing, but
it makes sense,
and again, it's good to see because people like we're everywhere, right? Like I mean. We're into hip hop. We're not just into, the traditional crafts, and some people do that. But I mean, you're seeing now artists who are working with traditional mediums, but doing new things with them. Or if we're on music, like Tanya Tagaq, right, who came from a throat singing background, Inuit throat singing. Cool. But she's probably much closer to, Björk than anything if you listen to her music. So I just think it's great that people see that it's not just, it's not just all traditional. Yeah, exactly. We've always been like early adapters. If a new technology came along, we didn't refuse to use it. Oh, well, no, that's not the way we do it. But if it was useful and helpful, we would adapt it. Yeah. So, I mean, every culture, right? It's not static.
Another great artist is Buffy St. Marie.
Yeah. She's been around a long time.
She's old school, yeah.
I got to meet her a few times from hosting APTN's Aboriginal Day Live, which is now National Indigenous Peoples Day Live. They changed the name of the whole Aboriginal Indigenous thing. It's now National Indigenous Peoples Day. Yeah, I got to meet her there, and it was great. I was hosting with a APTN broadcaster named Patrice Musso. They change up the hosts every year, and there's always a few stages, and they cut back and forth, amongst the stages. And she was on last, of course. And as we're introducing her, she's everything. She just ran over, and she, like this on the live broadcast, and gave both of us a hug. And she's like, I'm not biggieing myself. She goes, "You're so beautiful. I love seeing you guys doing this." And then she ran back. I think she was really into the moment. Yeah, and it was great. Yeah, and it was, I don't know, just, getting to meet an icon like that who's been around since the 60s, right?
Yeah. The hippie era and stuff, yeah.
Sesame Street, I remember.
I wanted to clarify, so is it Cheney Wanjak or... I was saying Chani Wanjak. I wanted to know because you had pronounced it.
I think it's Cheney, but we should double check.
They called him Charlie, though, in a lot of... I think the song was called Charlie.
Yeah.
And also that thing I said about janitors. Now I'm worried I'm going to get an email from a janitor.
I know.
Talking shit.
My cousin's a maintenance engineer, so...
Well, I love that line.
That's why I say I didn't want to... insult anyone's job or passion. Yeah. And I guess that's why I said, the point was they weren't saying, the world is now open to you. Like that's all I meant. It wasn't like if you had you wanted to be a mathematician or something. That's not what they were preparing
or an astronaut.
You for. An astronaut.
I love that line from Half Baked where Dave Chappelle plays, he says, "I'm a custodian or a janitor if you want to be a dick about it." I think this is actually a great time because we have been talking about the residential school stuff. First of all, to display some of the new tech we've got going on here, my dad, why don't you say hi to the audience for a second here?
Is your dad part of the new tech? Is that what
Well, now he has a mic finally.
There you go.
I'm an old dad with new tech.
There you go.
Original gangster.
Well, my dad put a lot of research into finding the best equipment for this upgrade, and it really is just awesome. So why don't you give yourself a round of applause there, Dad?
First, I have to find the applause button.
There you go. Yeah, that's at our disposal now. But also something.
Yeah, I told him as well. He's got the rim shot. I said, yeah, when we're talking about residential schools, be sure to punch that in a lot.
Well, no, one other cool thing we programmed in was a joke that you had done about growing up, just about Winnipeg.
Some of you may even be aware that Winnipeg itself, the name is a Cree word that means, but the summers are nice.
I just thought that was a really funny joke.
You know? I'd forgotten about that joke.
There you go.
Like there's jokes I guess when you've been doing it a while too, that I actually, it's weird. You think because there would have been a time that would have been a regular part of the act.
Yeah.
At least
comes
for
back
whatever. And I've had people before go, oh yeah, I liked your joke about bloody blonde. I'm like, you know what? I'd forgotten about that joke. And again,
it means you're writing a lot of stuff though.
Well, I could probably be writing a lot more, but but sometimes, I mean, it's not because they stopped working. It's just because you just sort of move on and you stop doing them.
You get sick of doing the same shit.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, you talk about forgetting jokes. I mean, now that we're coming out of the second lockdown, like when I was headlining at Yucks the first weekend they reopened, I had to, for the first time in a long time, set list and then actually run through it, which I had not done for years because, because it's not just, it is, okay, how did I say that again? But then in comedy generally, and what was the rhythm or sort of the cadence? How did I deliver
beat,
that?
yeah.
You're not acting like a Shakespearean actor up there, but comedy's often got a little rhythm to it.
Yeah, you have to have an awareness.
Yeah, exactly. And, and that can change in terms of big crowd, small crowd, responsive crowd, not as responsive crowd, but it's still there.
Yeah.
It just maybe you're playing it out a bit more or a little less, who knows. But that was the thing that I find I lose more, I guess probably like a musician or a dancer if you take a long break, right?
Yeah,
You're sort of like, you got to get your chops back. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm glad that we're doing this today as opposed to last weekend, because last weekend I was prepping for the competition.
Yeah, congrats, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, I got the audience vote, which was super cool. I didn't know anybody in the audience, so
that's legit.
To get that broad appeal feel, it was nice. But now this weekend I feel very, a lot of levity in my soul from, I've got a while now till round 2 and I can add a few more jokes and all that.
Yeah, soak it in. Yeah, enjoy it. Exactly. Well, contests, this is no buzzkill, I hope, for anybody, but I just find comedy, have fun regardless, but I mean, contests especially have fun.
Yeah.
Because, they're just such strange animals. I always say that comedy competitions are like a battle of the bands, but a battle of the bands where they allow jazz, hip hop, rock and roll,
that's such a great
classical.
analogy, yeah.
How do you say, that guy was one funnier than that person?
Especially
or whatever.
when you
it's just
consider
so many different styles, right?
At least with the Yucks one, first and second place in these early rounds is being chosen by a judge or possibly 2 judges. So that person might be into the rap of comedy and they might hate jazz comedy, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so you might just get screwed because you're the wrong genre for that judge.
For that judge on that night, exactly.
Or the audience even.
And a lot of times they're not necessarily comics themselves, so they don't kind of understand the invisible stuff, and like a lot of audiences they like the dirty stuff or they don't like the dirty stuff. And, so it's just so subjective. And then of course, the classic thing, the classic story about the comedy contest is in San Francisco. I guess this probably would have been like the early 70s, where the guy who won the San Francisco comedy competition that year then went on to run a fairly successful used car business, and number 2 was Robin Williams. So, I mean, that says all you need to know about comedy contests.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Yeah. Before we move into comedy, because I do want to talk about your comedy career, my dad, when we were doing Zoom, eventually I started realizing, hey, my dad's not here anymore, but I should get him to provide a question for each episode that I ask the guest. But now he's here, so I say, let's keep this segment going, but he can just ask you himself. So, and I know his question related to a lot of what we were talking about earlier, and it was similar to something I was going to ask you too, so hit it, Dad.
Is it what is the capital of South Dakota or something?
No, this is...
Nothing so simple.
Yeah, no, he wrote a great...
It's Pierre, by the way.
Well, last week when you were here in our aborted attempt, I learned just from listening to you, and it made me go look into it a bit more. And I find myself having quite an emotional reaction. But anyway, as a Canadian, I'm reading this because I had to get my thoughts together. As a Canadian who has for much of my life had only a peripheral awareness of the poor situation and unfair treatment of Indigenous people in our country, I personally feel a new heightened understanding as a result of the finding of the unmarked graves and more hearing the personal stories of life at the residential schools and of the mission of the government when they established those schools. To me, it equates to an attempt at cultural genocide perpetuated by the Government of Canada and the Roman Catholic Church. I see the recent events as a turning point, as hopefully Canadians at large are having a similar epiphany to what I've had. I'm hopeful that this is going to be a catalyst resulting in truly progressive change in the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. But I'm also fearful that nothing will change if we all sit back and let this fade from the headlines over time. So that's my thinking. But Don, how do you and your Indigenous family and friends feel about this? Do you have a feeling of hope that finally Canada as a whole is gaining true awareness of this dark history and the current challenges that will lead to real and lasting change? Or is it anger and despair at the exposure of yet another example of how Indigenous peoples have been mistreated and a belief that once again nothing will change?
Good question. Great question. I, having worked on these issues for decades at this point, I was a broadcaster with CBC for a while, not exclusively on Indigenous stories, but certainly did some there. What brought me out to Ottawa was working in communications for a royal commission called the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples back in the early 90s. Worked at the Assembly of First Nations, as you said, Oliver. If I wasn't hopeful, there's no way I could have done that work. And I've always said, I'm the most cynical optimist you'll ever meet, but I'm ultimately an optimist, and I think things can get better. What really gives me a lot of hope is our Indigenous youth, who there are certainly struggles out there, challenges facing so many of our youth, but they're really, for so long, they wanted to reach out to the elders, to learn who they are in their languages. And for so long, the elders wanted to pass that on, but they weren't connecting in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons. And that's happening now. And it's that pride that we were talking about that I'm seeing. And as well as the ability to walk in both worlds. It's not just, a friend of mine at the university who works at the University of Lethbridge says, my auntie always told me, you've got a laptop in one hand and a paddle in the other. Or they talk about walking in both worlds. You can be traditional, but be someone who does 3D computer modeling or all these kinds of things. So that's what gives me hope. Specific to the graves, like I say, you hesitate to look for good things, but I think it is shattering a lot of those things you talked about. About Canadians, thinking, the rest, well, how bad were they? And we're seeing how bad they can be. But I do share the concern you mentioned that on the one hand, there's going to be more of these. There was just another one a couple of days ago in Penellicut, British Columbia. The total now is like over 1,300 when you look at the ones that are discovered. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission said, we've been given very little access to any of the records, but based on the minimal access we've been allowed to have, like they put it at about 4,000. And they said, it's much bigger than that. That's just what we can put it at based on this minimal access. So there's going to be more of it. And my concern, as you were mentioning, was I do get worried that people have a tendency to get numb or they get overwhelmed and they just, I don't know what to do. That's just, I'm going to donate to Plan Canada or do something that I can get my head around, So I think the key is, trying to, ensure that we don't get numb, that we find ways to talk about these things. And, it's looking back right now with the graves, which is important because that's how we figure out, we got to know where we've been to find out how we got to where we are, so we'll know the right way to go forward. And that's what we also need to be thinking about, is the way to go forward. And I think part of that too is the education we talked about. I think a lot of these things are compelling education, and I mean actual classroom education. And there's a lot of good work out there on curriculum that finds ways to introduce these topics that doesn't traumatize children. Because, I do not expect a grade 1. I don't want a grade 1 class, to be hit on the head with all this stuff right away. They're kids, but there's a lot of good books, fiction books and curriculum that's been developed that you can start to introduce. And then, when they're older, 9, 10, like grades 9, 10, 11, 12, you can get into the heavier stuff, But that's what I think is going to be part of the long-term work, to make sure that, we can actually, as a country, find a way forward together that doesn't involve, let's try to assimilate the Indigenous people or take away all their rights. So I'm hoping those sorts of efforts can come from this, and that there is a national reckoning that is underway right now because of these. It really took something as stark and horrible and tragic as that to finally, I think, kind of break through a bit to people. And I think I'm hoping we can turn that reckoning into reconciliation and find ways forward. So it's a harsh lesson, and it's a harsh way to learn it, but I think it was an important one for everyone to start to get their heads around.
Yeah, I want to say two things. First of all, just when my dad was asking his question, there was a point where I laughed, and I don't know that I'll be able to edit it out, and I recognize that seems really inappropriate given the nature of the question, but it was because you thought he was done, and then he was like,
"Oh yeah, no, I inhaled.
Like a professor or something." I just thought that was funny, so I wanted
Well, when you re-edit it, throw the rim shot in after you laugh. It worked perfect.
Well, it's what we were saying about not traumatizing children that I find interesting, because I can sort of relate to that. In this Canada Day this year was very strange for me, because my 4-year-old, there was no way to explain to him the gravity of the situation, and he wanted to wear red, and he wanted to go do fireworks, and he wanted to, be proud to be Canadian, and everything that previous years probably would have been celebrated by many people. But I didn't know what exactly to do. I didn't want to take it away from him, and I didn't know how to explain it to him. So we kept it low key, but we tried to still let him, have a, because it's like a holiday for him. He's 4. It was just like Easter.
It is for a lot of, it's funny, when I moved to Ottawa, that was right around the time of Quebec's referendum to separate from Canada. Now, in Winnipeg, Canada Day was, we'll go to Birds Hill Park and watch the fire. It wasn't about flag waving, and and I'm talking about the average Winnipegger. I'm not talking about Indigenous people. It was just it was like you say, it's a holiday, and let's go to the park or do some fireworks or have a party or something like that.
Barbecue, whatever. Yeah.
So when I moved here, and I guess it was influenced a lot by the Quebec referendum possibly separating. Man, my first I was in the market, like everyone's running around with Canadian flag capes, and the cars are all painted. I thought, okay, this is the nation's capital. This is different. Yeah, it was definitely. And so Ottawa's that's Canada Day on steroids, definitely here in Ottawa. Yeah, but you could put your son on an orange shirt, right? That's what they're doing.
We didn't have an orange shirt, honest. That was like, we looked through his drawers, and it's a weird color to have a lot of clothes in orange.
It is. I would say if and only if you want, go online and order one. Just make sure it's an Indigenous group or person or whatever that designed it, and then you're supporting a good cause too.
Or one that goes directly to charity or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I will look into that. Why not? I don't have any orange in my wardrobe, so
like you say, it's not a
exactly. It's not a color a lot of people can kill with.
Exactly.
While we're still on this and talking about Indigenous stuff, I want to ask you, with the Canadian government appointing Mary Simon now as the new Governor General, does that, obviously there's positive things about that because she is Indigenous and it's the first time that's ever happened, but do you feel like they're just kind of placating an enraged public with that move, or do you think that, or are you hopeful that there was some honesty in that move?
Well, so
it seems like a convenient time for them to be like, oh, look how progressive and pro-Indigenous we are.
And a lot of governments are really good at the symbolic stuff, which is the low-hanging fruit, right? Like under Harper, they put up a stained glass window in Parliament that was in honor of residential schools. Nothing wrong with that.
No.
But I mean, okay.
If that's all you're going to do, there's something wrong with that.
Exactly. Yeah. How about we, deal with, some healing for survivors too. But there's or they also did, I think they recently announced a day too of I think a recognition day for I think it might even be Orange Shirt Day that they're gonna recognition of survivors, which again is all good and it helps awareness.
Yes.
But it is like the heavy lifting is how do we actually deal with restoring the land, building a better justice system that incorporates Indigenous concepts of justice. Like that's the hard work, right? How do we give life to the spirit and intent of the treaties that I mentioned before? So I'm not saying they're not doing anything on those fronts. I'm just saying a lot of governments, the symbolic stuff is a lot easier. Yeah. With Mary Simon, who's Inuit, and when we get to terminology, singular is Inuk, so a group of
Indigenous
Inuit,
is still
Inuk.
appropriate?
Yep, Indigenous is the umbrella. Inuit, Métis, First Nations, all fall under Indigenous. So she's Inuit. She's a great, tremendously accomplished person, so she'll do a great job. I myself, personally, it has nothing to do with whoever's in there at the time. I'm not big on the Governor General. A lot of First Nations are, though, because our treaties are with the Crown, right? That's who the treaties are with, is with the Crown, which, Canada brought the Constitution back. So, of course, we recognize we're dealing with Canada now, but that's why they always, the treaties talk about the honor of the Crown, and we talk about the honor of the Crown, upholding the treaty. So there are a number of pretty much, I think the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, which is the regional organization, and the head of the FSIN, the Federation of Sovereign Indian Nations in Saskatchewan, were all calling for a Indigenous Governor General. They actually wanted a First Nations Governor General because of the importance of the treaties and the treaty relationship. Myself personally, I guess maybe I'm a bit of an outlier, at least with them. I don't see it as a tremendously important. Well, no, I mean, it's a lot of symbolism, I guess. But, appointing an Indigenous person and someone as tremendously accomplished as Mary Simon, that's
it's going to have positives.
It's positive symbolism to me. And, we saw under the former Governor General Michael Jean, a Governor General can provide a lot of moral leadership and moral suasion. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I don't sort of like just dismiss it as
it's good for morale.
It's good, and I think I think it's for people who want a Governor General, having an Indigenous Governor General is a good thing. Yeah, and I think she'll do a tremendous job. So that. There's nothing bad about that.
No, it's true. Yeah, it was a weird situation. The timing definitely seemed suspect.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I, for example, and we know how this turned out. Appointing an Indigenous Justice Minister, I thought, was a pretty bold move when Jody Wilson-Raybould was the Justice Minister. But of course, that all went sideways. Is that the best way to put it?
That I don't know. I'm not huge in politics, which sounds like the most privileged thing you can ever say. I try, but I often get lost and I don't understand.
She's the one that got caught up in the NC Lavalin scandal.
Oh, okay.
And remember, she got, they said it wasn't a demotion, but she got removed from Justice to Veterans Affairs because she wouldn't.
So she didn't get completely fired. But
but then she ended up quitting, and it all.
Oh, yes, I do remember that. She resigned.
What had happened? Yeah. She actually went as an independent MP. So I thought an Indigenous Justice Minister was actually pretty more than symbolic. I mean, that's a justice. That's these are people who can make and create laws and change laws. So I thought that was a really good move, and it's really unfortunate that it just went sideways. But it's because she has integrity.
Well, one thing I want to ask you is, do you think that the people from the residential schools that were working there and doing these horrendous things, do you think we're going to see like a Nuremberg-style trials and accountability,
I don't know. People are calling for that, and there's even a move now to go to the UN and the international courts, and if Canada won't do anything. I mean, one of the problems is not a lot of those folks are around anymore.
I suppose, yeah.
And I think, it's like, I think we always need to remember that the ultimate responsibility lies fully with the federal government.
Yeah.
The churches were the Christian soldiers, and they're absolutely culpable in the abuse that happened, but they never would have got their hands on the kids if the government hadn't set this up. So I'm not saying they shouldn't be punished, and where they're, found and after a fair trial and everything, if there are convictions, then there should be. Absolutely, there should be.
Yeah, because I was going to say,
people
even
need
if
to be brought to account. And sorry,
no, not
what
at
I was
all.
going to say was, they also, and this connects to why they probably won't release the records is a lot of the churches, the Catholic Church being one, because the Anglicans, the Presbyterians, the United also ran residential schools, but the Catholic Church ran the most. They won't release their records. So that you should what are you trying to hide, and why?
Suspicious.
And why would you try to hide it? So, and the government as well won't release all the records. So that one thing is something that should, and that could lead to some trials. But that should definitely happen. Like open those records, because that's
There's gonna be a lot of-
history, and that's stuff that directly affected all of us.
Yeah, I mean, because even if the structure was there, both from the federal government and from these religious structures, and a lot of pressure being, oh, you gotta adhere to this way of thinking towards Indigenous people. In my mind, you're still the person doing the horrendous thing. There still takes a certain something to actually cross that line. Like I read stories about them like throwing babies into the incinerators and shit, and this was like babies from Native young girls that the priest had knocked up, and then they're like, oh, get rid of this living evidence. Like it's so fucked up on so many levels.
Yeah.
So I mean, people like that should rot. They should rot in a jail cell. You know.
I think where they can identify them and try them. Absolutely.
I don't care how old
I
they
think
are.
they should be brought to bear. Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Yeah. And I think there's sort of two levels of hurt that happened. There was the abuse. That's what a lot of people focus on because we can get our heads around it, right? Like hitting a kid or sexually assaulting or whatever the case may be.
Malnourishment.
But, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples made a good point, which was to say not that the abuse isn't important and not to put it aside, but even if none of that happened, these schools would have been profoundly damaging to First Nations and Indigenous people and culture.
Yeah.
Just being taken from your families, the trauma on both sides, the parents and family as well as the children. The basically being taught that your language is primitive, it's a savage language, that your ceremonies are evil and they're the devil's way and you're going to burn in this horrific place called hell, if you practice them. And your parents are stupid and savage for trying to pass this stuff on to you. Arguably that's abuse in its own right. But again, even if this sort of other horrific stuff didn't happen, the schools alone would have been tremendously damaging. You add that horrible abuse on top of it, and you're looking at we're dealing with the impacts today. This afternoon, this hour, we're dealing with the impacts of these schools.
Yeah, if you're a child and you're being told like basically what you are is wrong, like you shouldn't exist the way you exist.
Yeah.
Like everything about you is wrong.
And you look at people, the people who, turned to substance abuse, they were told you're a worthless person.
Is this true? Like, because I've heard before that Native Americans, they have like a really low tolerance for alcohol.
That I don't know. There was, there used to be a theory or research, which I believe was disproven, about this sort of gene we had that made us.
Well, I thought it was just that the settlers brought alcohol over, and because there wasn't that generational evolutionary adaptation to sort of have somewhat of a tolerance, like the Vikings and the Nordics would have had, or any other culture that drank alcohol.
But I don't know. I mean,
I'm not sure,
it would be interesting to see what the current research says. But having said all that, if you look at any group of people anywhere who've been marginalized and oppressed and suffered trauma, whether it's sort of like poor people in the South, in the U.S., whether it's Indigenous people in Canada and New Zealand, or really any culture, if you pick if you look at a culture that's been suffered that, you'll find high rates of alcoholism or substance abuse, poor health, you name it. Yeah. So maybe there is something physical, I don't know, but I just I think some ways it's a way to say, oh well, that's why they drink too much and they can't handle it.
Excuse.
Oh well, I don't know. Yeah. there's more going on there, I think.
Well, I know that you have somewhat of a time limit, so I do want to get to your comedy career. It seems like a really weird pivot from all this, obviously emotional and
it's been nonstop knee slapping laughs so far, hasn't it?
Well, it's been entertaining nonetheless, but I do think I love to talk about this stuff. I love learning about this stuff. I hope that this conversation encourages and educates people, because I know I'm learning stuff every time I talk to you. But you are also a very funny guy, so I want to get to some of that.
On a good night.
You, from what I read, you came to Ottawa around the age of 30, and that was when you kind of decided, I'm going to give it a try.
Yeah. It was sort of like, I'd always loved stand-up comedy. I remember as a kid, and this is the funniest thing. The record. So I remember as a kid, we were being in my aunt's house in Fort Francis, listening to, you might need to bleep the name, a Bill Cosby record. This was way back.
Statues of him are coming down, I can tell you that much.
I know. I liked, I mean, what I remember was, I don't know how old I was, 5, 6. Anyways, so he's talking about, he did a lot of stuff about his family and his brother and being a kid and all that. And so I remember listening to this record with the whole family. And put in whatever comedian's name you want. But I was laughing. And my older brother was laughing. And my parents were laughing. And my grandmother was laughing. And my aunt was laughing. We were just laughing. And I just thought, I don't know like how I would have articulated it then in my head, but I remember sort of thinking like, this is really cool and powerful that this can connect with everybody, and I'm not a black person who grew up in the United States, and he wasn't really talking about that. He was talking about being a kid, but you could connect with everything he was saying, and whether you experienced it or not, like it made you laugh. So I just always thought comedy is such a, it can connect with people.
It's enchanting.
No matter who you are. Yeah. I don't want to say powerful because I mean, you don't get into it for power. Don't get into comedy.
Some people do, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think I know a few of those folks, but I mean, but it struck me just how this can, some people like country, some people don't like this or they don't like that artwork, and comedy is this one art form where everyone should be laughing, no matter where they're from, no matter what their background, their education, what they do for a living. Yeah. And that's why it's so hard, I think, when if you're a hip hop band that's booked into a country bar and they hate you, you can at least go, well, that wasn't our crowd. We're doing our thing. Whereas in comedy, you're just supposed to be funny. So
there is you could be doing, a comedy thing at like a Comic-Con, and then okay, I can do a bunch of nerd jokes and it'll be right up their alley. Or if you did an all Indigenous show, there would be a lot of material where you'd be like, okay, well, this is, Yeah,
no, for sure. And I mean, I'll adapt. Like if I'm doing a show for all Indigenous people or an Indigenous event, I'll do more of the Indigenous stuff usually.
You did a bit about these seats down here are reserved or something like that. I saw online. It was making me laugh. I'm probably butchering that, but I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, no, and it's even like the classic sort of inside joke stuff that, not like a non-Indigenous person might not even necessarily get.
Yeah.
Or they might if they know, if they've been around a lot of Indigenous people. So I'll do more of that. But at the same time, if you're like, I'm Oliver George, I'm a comedian, then your agent or someone calls you, you're doing the the Snobby Foundation, evening banquet, and then tomorrow night you're doing the
Joe's Dive Bar.
Yeah, you're doing the Chicken Wire Club in the rural nowhere kind of thing, and you with your act are expected to
adapt,
do really well, adapt or find your own way to get across with those crowds. So that's the other thing that I think makes comedy so tough but fun, and that's sort of like you really have to find your way to, or you can be a niche comic, which some people do. But again, if you want to sort of do it as a living, you got to be able to play any room.
Yeah, that's kind of, I don't know that I'll ever get there. I don't know. Just because I'm a bit of a niche comic, I usually sing songs. I don't know. I kind of, I've talked about this on the show before, but I don't know that I'll ever have that commitment level that I respect so much.
Right, yeah.
And I recognize is very necessary. I've always been able to put on a good set and make them laugh, but I know I don't really have the grind to go touring and have soul-crushing moments, because there are going to be those,
Yeah, for sure.
So I respect the hell out of people who really just give it their all. And
I remember when I started, so just getting up on stage was terrifying enough. And then I'd see these really good comics who, were making a living. I remember Tom Stade, who he's in England now, and he's doing very well. But he was from Vancouver, very West Coast, really really funny. He was like your cool buddy you partied with in high school, who was funny, who put the work into becoming a really good comic. He was just so good. Anyways, I remember one time he was headlining, and I was there, and I was just worried about, just getting up on the stage. He did so much road work in so many different rooms that, there's a stage, a microphone, and a light. Perfect.
That's
You
all
know,
you
and
need,
he would just like, he wouldn't walk in and, oh, what do these people look like? And, oh, I don't think they're going to like that bit. Like he would just because he just was so seasoned and knew like how to play to so many different crowds that
the fear is gone essentially.
he
or
would
a lot of it.
he would walk in. And I mean, you know, you think, I don't know, like I don't really get nervous so much anymore, but I want to feel something. I want to feel like
anticipation.
I've actually had moments where, and I've talked to some of the guys who were around when I started, like Wafik.
Yeah.
We've had moments where you're actually there or you're about to go on. The MC is doing your intro and you're like, I don't feel like I'm going up to do comedy right now. And it doesn't mean you don't do well. You can do it. Just moments where like I want to feel, like you say, some anticipation.
Yeah.
I'm not a high energy comic, but I want to feel that, all right, I'm ready to get up there and do my thing now, you know? And there's been times where I'm like, I don't feel like I'm just doing.
Well, you and Wafik have both been doing it like 25 plus years.
Well,
so.
20, yeah.
20? Oh, I thought you were.
Well, it might have been 20 and a bit, but Waf was at it before I was.
No, but I saw a set that was from 96 or something, which is 25 years ago.
96?
That's 25 years ago, my friend.
96. Yeah.
I think.
don't
Wasn't
know.
that Bullard appearance somewhere around there? Maybe I'm wrong.
Could have been.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either way,
But
you've been
even
doing it a
then-
long time.
Yeah.
So you're bound to have those moments like you were describing where, you know, for me, every time I get the preemptive, not always nervousness, but like definitely whatever you want to feel, I'm feeling lots of that.
Yeah.
Because I take these big gaps between performing a lot. It's something I'm trying to work on. But
Yeah. I used to be not a pacer, but a walker. When I was starting, like doing openers and that, when I was starting like new talent night or amateur night, like especially
Wandering.
then, I wouldn't pace like nervously. But I would need to go out and walk around the block and run through my stuff.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
I don't know if it's. I think I genuinely have a touch of OCD, like not in any way you would even notice. But if someone interrupted me, like if you came up and said, "Oh, hey Don," did you, like I'd have to start
You have
over
to
again.
finish the
I'd have to
circuit.
go through my
Yeah,
whole.
yeah.
I'd have to go through my whole thing again. Yeah, so I was always like that, and I don't.
I thought you were talking about on stage because there are people who do that. They walk around back and forth.
No,
on
I've
stage.
always been and you know, this was partly conscious when I started. I wanted to be a bit of a stand and deliver comic. Like if you watch me now, I do a more. I find I do this a lot. Don't actually? I guess because I keep the mic in the stand most of the time. Because I really wanted to be able to get through with my material and style, for lack of a better word. I didn't have an acting background, so I could never be that Robin Williams type of whoa, and look at this, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I love that, but I knew early on that I would have to work really hard to do that. And I thought, well, if I'm going to have to work really hard anyways, do I want to try to be something I'm not? The other thing I can't do is I can't do the anger really, right? I mean, I've had comics, they mean it in a good way, but go, like you're Nate, like, aren't you angry? Like, oh, you should have more angry and attitude up there. And I always thought, no, if I can sort of like come over without trying to be big and bold, without yelling at them or shouting or trying to do.
You have a very warm energy.
I wanted to try that. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's the kind of comedy like I wanted to. I'm not saying it's the only kind of comedy. Like I love the angry comedy. I love the sort of outrageous, all over the place comedy. But I just thought that's what I want to be able to do. I also early on. Didn't swear just because I just did not want to get into a habit of, you drop an F-bomb into a punchline and it's just human nature of the crowd. You're going to get a bit more of a spike than you would without the F-bomb. And there's even like some punchlines or lines that totally rely on, an F-bomb. I've got a couple like that, are way better if I curse. But early on, I just didn't want it to become a crutch.
Or vulgar humor if you're talking about jerking off all the time or that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
and and for me, I had no interest in that. And again, it's for me. I'm not judging. Like, Mike Wilmot, who, if he wants to, can be dirtier than anyone, is hilarious, and he's a brilliant writer and a brilliant performer. And what I love too is when he gets dirty, it's really more about him. It's not like, this chick was such, it's not sort of that thing. It's about him and his own ineptitude and things like that. But I mean, that's a good example of someone who could, like, people who go into a comedy club thinking, oh, I hope it doesn't get too dirty. Wilmot will have them rolling in the ails, because it's all how you come across through it and how you bring people into your world. Yeah. And he's just like so good. But for me, it's just nothing that was drawn to. I didn't want to like talk a lot about bodily functions and stuff like that. It just wasn't,
That's fair.
kind of where I'm at. Yeah, exactly.
It's not everybody's jam. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Mic stands I find I have an interesting relationship with because, mainly because if I'm bringing my guitar, I've been to shows where they're like, oh, we don't have a mic stand. And I'm like, I kind of need a mic stand. I had to run across the street and start asking random bars if they had a mic stand once, like 10 minutes before a show.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We found one, thank God. But
Wow.
and the other thing is one of the first times I ever did stand up was in a competition. And I came first with the judges and the audience that night. And I got the owner of the club, which I won't say who, but it was not Howard, who is a great guy.
It's one of two.
Well, you can do your own by
Well, maybe
default,
not.
whatever. But yeah,
There were
Howard's a great guy.
Different clubs opened and closed.
And it was like the immediate, like right after we're doing really well. And I'm sure I was super like novice. I didn't know anything, but it was like, oh, we're going to have this. Come here, like sit down. I'm going to talk to you about this. And the first thing pretty much, no like good job or like any friendly, cordial, anything. It was tomorrow night, if I see that mic stand, you don't move that mic stand right at the beginning of your set, I'm going to lose my fucking mind or something like that. And I was,
Yeah.
So,
Well, I know who you're talking about and who you're talking about as a very corporate approach to comedy. Because I would get things like that, because certain people are at it longer, we're already doing it. When
I like
was
that we're
there.
keeping it vague because this has come up in previous podcasts and been edited out. But if we do it right, we can leave this one in.
Yeah, but I mean, if you know Ottawa, it's not, you don't exactly gotta
Yeah, well,
be
I don't have
Sherlock
ill will
Holmes
towards
to-
this person either.
Exactly,
do your
exactly.
thing. You're clearly doing something right. I've been to great shows there.
But I've heard like similar things like, don't open with new material. Like, I don't want you to, and I kind of get it, but at the same
I don't
time,
mind the advice. It's the delivery method of,
Well,
I have to be gruff and intimidating. I don't understand that.
No, and that again, to me, it's, this is a creative medium. It's one of the last places for free speech, which of course, you will have incidents.
And podcasts.
Exactly. So why do you want to tell someone how they can do that? Let them learn. And now I understand if it's a pro show or a corporate where there's a lot of money, or the client paid a lot of money. You don't want to do a bad show and open with 20 minutes of the stuff you just thought of.
But if someone's just figuring out, like it's one of their first ventures,
Exactly.
you want to like ruin the experience and make them so they don't want to ever come and even approach it because they're worried about running into,
and I mean,
people like that.
The best advice I got early on was some of the technical advice. Not so much, oh, don't do that joke this way, do
Don't wear
it that
shorts,
way.
I've
Yeah,
heard.
exactly.
I've gotten that one.
I mean, some of it was like, you're too close to the mic, and so like you may not, it's distorting, or just hold it here.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, that's stuff that I think is helpful because you won't necessarily always learn that on your own because you're not hearing yourself through the the house sound
Definitely,
system.
yeah.
So there are some good technical things, but things like, what material you should and shouldn't do, and how you should, deliver your stuff. Like let me figure that out. That's why I don't believe in comedy courses. I think they're helpful for people who are really hesitant and actually it'll help give them confidence that they're just
Like, oh, I
not
could do
flailing
this.
around.
Yeah.
But the stage will teach you everything you know, and then you find good either club owners or comedians who give good advice because they don't all do, and that's not an insult. I know amazing comedians who never had all their advice boiled down to, well, do it the way I do. And they weren't even aware of that. They were just saying, oh no, you should be angrier. And sort of the good advice you get. And I think Howard at Yuck Yucks is really good for this, is he'll look at what you're doing and give you, if he gives you advice around that, as opposed to don't wear a suit and yell more or be dirtier or whatever. Like Howard, I think, looks at the comedian and what they're trying to do, and he gives advice based on that, as opposed to trying to change them to some corporate cookie cutter or whatever the case may be. So I think
He's very approachable too, I find.
Yeah, you find people, and there's some comics too who give really good advice based on what you're doing, and so the advice I will get will be different from what you'll get or what some other comic will get. Because they're trying to just help you figure out what you're doing. So yeah, you got to watch. I mean, a lot of people have been at it a while, have a lot of good advice, but it doesn't mean you should listen to everything that you're told, because I've seen people get really bad advice too.
There's a lot of unsolicited advice in general.
I just find that like if someone wants to ask me anything, like I'm happy to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
But I will rarely volunteer advice. I mean, if I think, oh, I got to tag.
Comes off as pompous.
I got to tag that. Yeah. And it's kind of like.
Even if you're right, it comes off as kind of douchey.
And I'm like, who am I to tell anyone what they should be doing? You know?
That's
like,
how a normal, sane person thinks.
Exactly.
But in comedy, we run into a lot of people who don't check that box necessarily.
Well, and this is going to sound really pretentious probably, but I've seen people who've been doing it very little who are full of advice for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And like, really? Like, you're sharing the benefit of, you've done 3 more shows than that person, and you're
exactly.
the wizened elder who's going to, tell them about stuff now. So I get it gets exciting when you start. It's fun to be part of a scene and a crowd and everything, but, people need just slow down a little bit. And,
well, if someone's asking you, like you said, it's a totally different story.
Yeah.
I remember one of my favorite people to talk to when I had jokes I was kind of wondering about is I would ask Tavis, and he was always just a really friendly ear who would give me some great feedback and, just easy to talk to.
Yeah.
Never felt judged, like my material was being judged, but more just that he was just one of these guys who loves comedy. And Tavis Maplesden, I should say, he's been on this show, as has Wafik, who we were speaking of earlier. So and Howard's coming on soon too. So
that's all. Well, there you go. The whole Yucks gang. Yeah. No, and Tavis is a guy who'll look at the joke, and this is what I always tell people about writing too. It is good to get together to write, but you'll find. You should be a little selective, and you don't want too many. Like I find 3 is a good writing number, because if you and I might get jammed on something and not have anything, then a third, having a third voice helps. But I mean, just like people who give you advice, I've written with people. Like there's a woman who used to do comedy who doesn't anymore in Ottawa, who was very theatrical, and that was her, and she did well, and that was her style.
Yeah.
But when we were on the road, a few of us, and we try to write. I would have an idea, and she would go, "Oh yeah," and then she'd put your head like this and go, "La la 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 la."
I'm sort of all her way.
I'm like, "You're not writing for me," And so, and some people can't, and in fact, good writers. That's what they're writing for voice. So the joke I would write for you would not be the same I would write for like Tavis or Wafik or something like that, because it comes down to voice too. Like
which is like screenwriting. You're writing for characters.
Yeah. And what you just said, you might kill doing that, but A, I can't do that. B, I don't want to do it. And,
that's the bigger part.
It's not what I was trying to do with this thing here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a funny question. I thought, and maybe this will be a good story. I'm hoping. When I say craziest comedy show in Ottawa, what comes to mind? In your personal experience?
It's you've already had Wafik on, so you can't. Well, if you have him on again, ask him about this. Or Howard, you might. I don't know how much. Anyways, the craziest comedy shows in Ottawa, I can't tell you about, because back in the day, Yucks used to be on Albert Street.
Yes, I remember.
Yes, yeah. The Capitol Hill Suites, the basement of the Capitol Hill Suites. So this is more, not when I was first starting, but I'd been into it, and we were, doing good, working a lot. Wafik, was definitely part of the scene. Rick Curry was around, but he was already, he was a headliner and probably writing for Bullard at the time.
He writes for This Hour, right?
He wrote for the Mercer Report.
Oh, Mercer. Okay, that's it.
And he still does work with all those folks. Yeah, he's easily the best comedian in
I know
Ottawa.
he was doing some shows right in Nepean right before the pandemic. He did one at that brewery over there.
No, he's the best. He's not as well known because he doesn't hit the side rooms or things like that. And a lot of the younger folks might not even know him, but he's easily the best comedian in Ottawa.
Wow.
And probably one of the best to come out of Ottawa. Yeah. And just an amazing writer. Like you just look at his resume, he's just an amazing writer. And he's a guy, this wasn't the point of my story, but we talk about different rooms. He could play like the rowdiest biker bar or the nicest corporate awards ceremony with the same act and
wow.
and kill. Yeah. He did not. It wasn't sort of like I need different acts for different crowds. It just his stuff.
That's impressive.
It was just so appealing, and people could relate to it. Yeah, but yeah. So Rick wasn't really there a lot. But anyways, we were at that point. It's just some of the most fun we've ever had, where the club was kind of like our hangout, And I was younger. The wait staff, the bar staff were all younger. And so we would have these, we'd call them the late show. We did a few roasts there before the Oh Craps, the Ottawa Comedy Roast and Awards presentation
Yes.
was a thing. Like when I was got engaged, they did a roast for me. When people would, Tracy McDonald, who won Star Search twice, when she went down to the U.S., we did a going away roast and party. But
Oh, that's cool.
but it wasn't always a roast. We would just sometimes we'd call them the Late Late Show, and we would wouldn't start till about 1 a.m. Whenever we'd all converge back from our out of town gigs or whatever, or if you were at the club, you go to the club for a last pint or something. And then some nights, it wasn't just our decision, it wasn't our club, but we would just, audience was gone. We would lock the doors. The sound system was on. The taps stayed on. Nice. And we just partied, and it wasn't even always a show, but we would do shows. And the whole idea was do the stuff either you're working on or the stuff you could never do. Because,
that sounds amazing.
Because nowadays they'd call it getting canceled. The whole idea was, and of course, everyone was probably in a pretty good mood at that point.
So like Darren Frost level material.
That or even but edgy in any kinds of ways. And we would just and then of course it was a whole party would be going on, and it would, like I say, it wasn't always a show. And I remember one night, I can't remember what there was a reason for the party, but I remember one night looking around at one of our late shows, and the club was like, when you see those tornadoes, but they've got like 5 funnels coming down. That's what the club is like. Okay, there's something crazy going on over there, something hilarious going on. And I'm not like, no one ever fought. That was the thing. It was just such a good vibe, but it was just pandemonium.
Like a circus.
It was just, craziness everywhere. And those were just some of the funnest nights and some of the
Assuming
craziest
none of these
shows.
were filmed.
No, this is these phones did not have cameras on them in those days.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. But there was the occasional picture taken. Howard's probably still got some of them, but nothing incriminating. But those were just some of the most fun. It's just some of the most fun I've ever had.
That sounds great. Yeah, I wish I could be a fly on that wall for a minute. I want to talk about a couple shows because you were a host of 2 different shows that I know of: Fish Out of Water and Crazy Like a Lynx.
Yes, on APTN.
Which, a couple things I want to talk about here. First of all, APTN for Aboriginal Indigenous, BET for Black people, and then white people have ABC, NBC, CBC. No,
everything else. Yeah,
basically
exactly.
everything else.
And I always say APTN, if you're looking to find it in any given city, it's very easy. This will work in any major city. If you're looking for APTN, get your remote control, go up the dial till you see people in your lobby, then go 1 channel back. And that's usually APTN.
Really?
It really is the Indian Reserve of Canadian cable channels. It's usually way up in the middle of nowhere, and white people never go there.
I thought you could get it on Apple
cousin works
TV.
there.
I had it written down.
I think you can get it on Apple, I'm sure.
So-
Actually, we just got Apple. I haven't even watched it yet.
Both of these shows you had a co-host. One was Dawn Dumont, and the other one was Dakota Ray Herbert.
For Fish Out of Water, I was the host for the three seasons. We did a 4th season, and Dawn Dumont was my co-host for the 4th season. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And Crazy Like a Lynx started with a co-host, which is Dakota Hebert. Yeah.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but I thought this was interesting that these programs kind of countered each other in a way, because Fish Out of Water showed a modern Indigenous person going sort of back to his roots and exploring the traditional ways of living and challenging yourself with stuff like that. Whereas the Crazy Like a Lynx was kind of the opposite of that, right? Where you were showing Indigenous people doing well and flourishing in modern day society. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, more or less. I mean, the way we look, of course, we didn't have Crazy Like a Lynx wasn't even an idea when we did Fish Out of Water. But the idea of Fish Out of Water was the city Indian goes out and tries to learn the traditional skills, because the whole idea going in was like, I'm not Survivor Man.
I saw you shooting a bow and arrow.
I'll be the first to. I am not. That's why the producer, when she first talked to me, her name's Kateri Legault of Interdigital Productions. We've got mutual friends. We were at a wedding, and this is where she first approached me. She goes, I want to do this series. And I just thought it was wedding talk and whatever sort of thing. Didn't think anything would come of it. And she talked about the idea. And I said, well, Kateri, I said, I'm not, I genuinely don't like camping. I'm an outlier with my own people. I'm not like, I got to get back to the land. Like, I love the city, And my spirit animal is giant tiger, as I often say.
You like glamping.
Where was that rim shot when I needed it? I'm just kidding. But no, and she said, well, that's exactly what I'm looking for.
Nice.
It's like I say, I'm not Survivor Man. I'm his remains were found in spring man. That guy. And that's what she wanted. She said, I want someone that either the audience can kind of, laugh at and just watch you struggle, but then people who don't know it either can go, oh yeah, that looks tough, but let's have fun doing it. So then so it really was get the city Indian, out learning the traditional skills and struggle and have fun. Crazy Like a Lynx is a bit more, what are our people doing now, like you say? But at the same time, so it is like we worked with the First Nations snowboarding team out in BC.
Okay.
We worked in the Powwow Cafe in Toronto, which is this amazing, taco, Indian tacos, which are very popular at Powwows. But he does all these different kinds of tacos and other food, and it's just an amazing place in Kensington Market in Toronto. So it's what are our people doing now? But the same thing, we get into how does your what of your traditional ways, how does that inform what you're doing?
Oh,
so even the
okay.
snowboard team, they learn about the mountain and respect for the mountain. It's not just snowboard lessons.
Very cool.
They get all this stuff. Yeah. And so
Is that one still airing?
it's still, we should have been done the second season by now, but
Pandemic, of
this
course.
thing happened.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we did one season. We've been on hold, and I think we got some shoots in late next month started.
Oh, nice.
So we'll probably have to
Awesome.
mask up for certain parts or whatever. It's going to be weird.
Because
But
Fish Out of Water was quite a long time earlier, right?
a few years ago. Yeah. There was
okay.
probably a couple of years between Fish Out of Water and Crazy Like a Lynx. Yeah, it's same producer though, Kateri Legault, Interin Digital.
Nice.
Same director, Neil Grahn, who used to be in a sketch troupe called Three Dead Trolls in a Baggie. They had a show on CBC for a while. So same director, same producer, and yeah.
And I know you can access this, I believe, on the APTN website.
Yep. I haven't tried lately, but used to be able to watch episodes on the APTN website.
Oh, I thought it was something you had to either donate or subscribe.
I
but
don't think so. Well,
maybe I'm wrong.
Good question. Fish Out of Water? I'm not sure. I'd have to double check it.
You don't even know how to rep your own
I'm the worst.
stuff.
I don't even have my
No.
own website. I'm not I'm the worst self-promoter. People always say, well, how can I, what's your website? Or I don't have one.
I get that. I love doing this part of all this, but I'm not a big fan of the social media and all the legwork.
And I would just end up saying no to more things than I want to,
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to think that anyway, so I have enough people come. But I mean, as it is, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. It's not sort of like I'm looking for tons of stuff to be coming in,
Yeah. I want to know a couple of things. One is I'll go to this one first because, again, Indigenous topic. I know your father was Indigenous, but your mom was Swedish, right?
Yep.
So I wanted to know.
She's not just white, she's downright pale.
There you go. Yeah. So I wanted to know, did you ever experience, I don't know what to call it, I guess counter racism from fully Native people who would then try to say, oh, well, you're not fully Native, and ostracize you in that way?
No, not really. But what I did, I never actually experienced that. I did get, I would experience racism indirectly because not everyone, see, if you saw my brother, and I'm going to actually talk skin color, is a little darker than me. I guess he got more dad's genes,
Yeah, that happens with...
I'm a little lighter, yep. So people who know Indigenous people will often say, are you First Nations or whatever? Because just the round face, I got a high forehead and that.
Yeah.
But people who don't immediately assume. And then you hear Don Kelly, like that doesn't exactly scream traditional Ojibwe, right? But so what I would get sometimes is indirect racism of being in a group of people just talking, and then someone will. I remember one time at a party, and this girl was talking about a lousy car that she had just bought. She goes, "Oh yeah, it's a real Indian chariot," or worse, right?
So people are mistaking you for white, and then...
I was like the stealth Indian, exactly.
Yeah.
The stealth First Nation. I was like, and there's a couple times I just realized I got to call it when I hear it, right? I'm not going to confront and be angry and challenge people to fights. But a couple times it happened, I kind of let it slide, and I thought, oh, well, that's not good, though. People need to know that, people hear these things and that they're saying these things. So I would get I would also get the classic, but not you, Don. You're just unemployed.
That's
Well,
the worst.
not you, Don. They're just drinking when they get their money. Well, not you, Don. And I would get a lot of that too, So again, you got to push back against that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, that if I didn't know you were Indigenous, I might be, curious. But then when someone tells you, I go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. I had a friend who was half Vietnamese, and he, like, you could tell he wasn't straight Caucasian, but you wouldn't have really guessed Vietnamese unless he told you, because you'd be like, oh, he looks kind of like he could be almost Greek or so. That's why I was curious about this question in general, just because, it's a different, we all have different ways of growing up, and some people are purebreds, so to speak, or whatever you want to call it, as horrible as that sounds.
I have seen on Twitter discussions that I don't engage in about, white passing First Nations people, and they tend to do better than, those of us who really look.
Interesting.
And I don't know that that's the case. My cousin Wab Canoe is head of the provincial NDP in Manitoba, so, he's doing fine, and he's clearly, he's proud of who he is, and doesn't try to hide it.
His name is Canoe.
Yeah. So I don't know. But I mean, I've seen people who like these discussions about white passing or darker, and I just think, we've been divided so much by governments and other entities over the generations. Why do we want to divide ourselves?
Oh, racism and skin color and sexism, all the shit that people fight about, it just boggles my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand conceptually how these things come to be the way they are, and systemic racism and
Remember, now I used to be an original Star Trek nerd when I was a kid. Like I was like
Kirk and McCoy.
Yeah,
okay.
Kirk, Spock, McCoy.
That's always been my favorite.
Like always been my favorite too. Although I've watched like Next Generation, the other ones. But I mean, I was a geek for a while. Like I was like winning trivia contests and stuff like that. Yeah. So maybe your dad can help us on this, because the reason I'm reminded of that is there was that great Star Trek episode about what was the race? They were half black and half white.
Oh, I know those guys.
There wasn't was it the Badens or something like that? Or Frank Gorshin played the main guy.
The Riddler.
Yeah, exactly. He played in Star Trek. And he was chasing this other guy who'd escaped, and it came out in the episode, well, why are you chasing him? Like, well, they're inferior. And he goes, well, what do you mean? Well, isn't it obvious? He's black on this side of his body.
Oh, I do remember that.
We're black, and that really
how ludicrous it all
shows
is.
how ludicrous like racism based, racism is, but I mean skin color and all that too is.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a really good, it really made the point pretty clear.
Yeah.
That's a famous episode. I mean, that's one of the greats, that one there.
Yeah, yep. And back in the day, I could have told you the name, all the characters, what those aliens were.
I remember a lot of them. I remember the one with that kid who had like the mental powers, Charlie X.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of them I remember from. Honestly, the thing I love about the original series is that they didn't have like any special effects really, and the sets they would build to look like a foreign like landscape of another planet and stuff. Just, I don't know. I thought it was so cool.
Well, I loved it. And you recognize sort of the lower budget aspects of it,
But they tried really hard to do the best with what they had,
And the stories were so good that it wasn't about how shiny is that thing, but
or how bad is that alien costume.
What I love as a Indigenous person is I love how the Federation had the prime directive: you will not interfere with any society or culture.
Yes.
And Kirk would go in and just screw it up
every time.
He would overturn everything.
He would usually sleep with someone from that population.
And then he'd have sex with some alien, and then and I just loved. I mean, I remember one episode he just overturned their whole belief system, and then they take off. So I just as an Indigenous person, been there, prime directive.
If you have not seen this, you got to Google it afterwards. But there is an episode, I think fairly early on, where they tried to pass off this non-intelligent alien, but it's literally like a small dog with antenna like taped to its head, and Spock or somebody's holding it like right in the frame. No one questions. It's clearly a dog. I don't know. I guess a planet could have dogs with just a slight variation, hypothetically. But it was just some guy on the cruise pup who was there for the day or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, maybe you can tell me if this is true. I thought this was very cool when I researched this, but did you open for Mitch Hedburg?
I did.
What was that like?
If someone was to ask me, like, what are your, like, favorite moments in comedy, or like what has comedy enabled you to do that, you most cherish, it would be opening for Mitch Hedburg. He was on his way to do his first Just for Laughs gala.
Oh, nice.
He had done Letterman, so it wasn't like he was like, I had discovered him, from the unknown. I'd actually seen him on Letterman once, but he was not nearly as big as
somewhere around
he went on to be. Yeah, right around there. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
his first Just for Laughs gala, which he destroyed, and it just put him like not just the next level, but 3 or 4 levels ahead.
Yeah.
So he was coming through Canada doing a lot of clubs and basically a lot of tune-up gigs and warm-up gigs and all that. So I'd seen him on Letterman, thought he was amazing. Literally a new voice. Like there's a lot of funny comics, but this was like his voice was unique and his perspective and the material. It was just, I just blew me away.
Well, you don't see straight one-liner comics that often anymore.
Yeah, and especially like, that kind of, and the other thing
Psychedelic one-liners.
When you watch Mitch Hedburg, what's interesting is he is a one-liner, but he's often got 6 or 7 lines.
Yes,
Like he will then move on, and he keeps that momentum going because
Yeah.
of his style, and they're funny.
Yes,
like the
definitely.
guy could write, just incredible. And it really is a great example of we probably wouldn't do as well with his material as he did.
No.
Maybe you try to imitate him or whatever, but it just really was his a unique voice in every sense of the word. So when he was coming through Yucks, Howard's plan was he brought in Alan Park, comedian who was on Air Force for a while as well, but he was a touring pro to MC. And he was just going to, I think, hire like the cheapest people he could. And I just lobbied. I said, Howard, you got to put me on that
That's
show.
so cool. I
Like,
didn't even know he had come to Ottawa.
I was like, I'll do it for free all weekend. Just put me on that show. So Howard put me on, and Tracy McDonald was on the show as well.
Cool.
And the weekend was amazing. Howard, if you hear Mitch Hedberg's very first album, CD, whatever, Strategic Grill Locations,
Okay.
he has a bass player playing behind him because he's got that weird style that it actually like it just sort of a jazzy kind of low rhythmic bass behind him. Howard hired a local bassist to play behind him.
Oh, cool.
Which was great. In fact, at one show, Mitch Hedberg goes in the middle. By the way, y'all know this is Mitch Hedberg, right? He was the bassist. But it was great. I mean, he was shy. He was with his girlfriend at the time, Lynn Shawcroft, who was a Toronto comedian who they'd met down in I think Los Angeles. But regardless, and he was shy, not like sort of like needs to be the center of attention or life of the party. We hung out after the shows, which was great. He gave me, which I still have, should have brought it. Anyways.
Yeah, if you want to put it up on the wall.
Yeah, exactly. He gave me his CD, Strategic Grill Locations, but you can buy it in stores. But this was the version he made himself. So those really thin CD covers?
Yeah.
And the cover was a drawing. I mean, it wasn't an original, but that Lynn had done of him, sort of like kind of almost an abstract caricature kind of picture of Mitch Hedberg.
Cool.
And he signed it. And this was the one he was selling out of the trunk of his car at the time.
So
and
cool.
You can buy it now. And so
Take a picture of that, and I'll put it up in the episode if you email it to me.
I've got. Of course, I'd never
Treasure
throw it
that,
on
yeah.
eBay, but I wonder, what it might go for on some of these things. So he signed it, and he wrote a nice little note to me, and it was a great weekend. It was just great getting to watch him all the time, and the way he worked. The material didn't always change, but it would change up, and it always struck me so hard to remember all that material.
That's what I've always said about one-liners. Like Stephen Wright, is that his name? How am I forgetting his name? Yes,
Stephen
okay,
Wright,
yeah. I thought I got it wrong there for a second, but he's another guy who you watch him just one after the other.
Yeah,
and how are you doing this? There's no storytelling to kind of ease you along,
Yeah, the only thing I can think, and Mitch Hedberg said this too, was sort of clustering. Even if they're not the same topic, there's ways to sort of get a thread sometimes.
Like a code word in your brain that kind of...
A code word in your brain, or
Yeah.
this all hangs together under the sense of, or a sensibility.
A
or
larger
something like that.
topic,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, he didn't really say much about it, but I mean, it really was, how do you remember all that? And... and I remember one night he went up, and one of his first lines was, in high school, I was voted class clown because I wore so much makeup. And it was the first time he'd thought of it between shows. And it was so funny because it was really more a comics line. Like, it was like the audience laughed. He goes, I don't know, that's a new one, man. That one came way too easy. I wonder if that's someone else's. Pretty sure I'll find out when I go back to LA. Because comics will always, they stole your line the other night. So but it was his line. Yeah. So it was just
That's so cool.
When you talk about sort of what sort of like dreams you might have
Bucket
that you might
list
be
or
able to do.
whatever.
Yeah, I mean that's well up there.
You're talking to someone who got high with Tommy Chong, so I know exactly what you're talking about, man.
That's right. Tom State, who I mentioned earlier, did as well.
Oh, nice. I'm sure he's gotten high with plenty of people. So, but I don't care. It's
And I
still-
love Tom because Tom said, that's one for the grandkids.
Yeah.
Like this is before weed was legal, of course. So, yeah.
Definitely. Well, and unfortunately, a couple of years after that, Mitch would have been gone.
Yeah.
Another tragic victim of opioid abuse and addiction.
Yeah. And really, I mean, for people who just know him through his career, very surprising. Like obviously he came off as someone who probably wasn't a stranger to substances, but the way he died was sort of like, okay, I didn't really expect
Well, when you
that,
worked with him, he didn't come off as like a tweaker or something.
No, it was like just weed. That was it. Yeah. Well, I mean, if there's other stuff going on, but
I wonder.
didn't
Yeah,
seem
who
to be.
knows? I mean,
but having read about him and when he passed on the articles, they did talk about how. Oh, and Doug Stanhope in his book of comedy stories, road stories and comedy stories, talks about Mitch Hedburg a bit and says, it was really more towards the end he got into this harder stuff. And, articles talked about how he never got a complaint about a show, but then at a certain, complaints started coming in. And I guess that's when he was getting into the stuff that did him in.
well, you hear that with a lot of musicians too, and they claim, or you hear that they'll do really great shows where they're on some other level because the drugs are some doorway to creativity or whatever. But then for every one of those, there's some show where they're bombing because obviously drugs have that aspect on your body too. You know?
Well, Bobcat Goldthwait, I'm sure he's not the only one talked about back in the day doing shows on acid.
Good Lord.
Can you imagine doing it's
That's
tough
like
enough-
Hendrix, though.
it's-
He would stick him in his bandana and shit.
But I mean, to do comedy though too. I mean, it's tough enough getting up in front of a room like you're being looked at. So are they all looking at me? Yeah, they are, and they're
The
expecting you to
one that
entertain
makes
them.
sense, which was huge in the scene in the 80s, especially, was Coke. Because
Right, yeah.
especially if your act is something like Robin Williams,
You got to keep your energy.
People are like, wow, he's so animated.
Yeah,
He is.
the hours you're working, everything. Yeah, that's right.
Shit. I think we're like, I mean, I could talk to you forever, but I think we're
Oh my
running-
gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
My wife's going to kill me.
I do have to
I'm
ask you the season 2 question before we get out of here.
Oh, yeah.
And you got to play me on the arcade one round too. I
Okay.
haven't had the opportunity for so long.
Oh, and you know what? I forgot the wall thing. I had it last time.
You live close, so bring it on.
Yeah,
over.
I'll bring it over. I wanted to give a plug for the one. Can I do a quick plug?
Sure,
for the
yes,
wall?
yes,
All
of
right.
course.
It's a sticker that says it's got a cool sort of stylized outline of a dog, and it says "Save Res Dogs," and it's got Cree syllabics for dog in the dog. It's a sticker, you could bumper sticker, put it on your laptop or put it on the wall. But Save Res Dogs. They are an Indigenous grassroots organization that does fundraising. They'll sell stickers. They'll sell coffee mugs. I got one of their coffee mugs. They'll take donations that gets vets to northern and remote communities. They do spay and neuter clinics. They do training. It's not just dogs. They'll deal with cats and any other animals. Because, some of these, the people are struggling, and of course we need to think of them, but of course there's a lot of animals around there too. So this is just a great group. They're the good guys and the good gals. I mean, they're just doing something really good. So Save Res Dogs. I'll bring the sticker.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
We'll edit a shot of it into the show.
And it sounds like it's small enough that you can get it on the prime real estate that'll actually be on camera.
Oh yeah,
every
it'll
week,
fit.
so-
Oh, it'll fit. Yeah, anywhere. That's
Awesome, man. Yeah, come back anytime. You live close and stick it up there. But the season 2
Hey.
question I'm going to ask you now.
And
before
I'll bring the sticker as well.
Yes, definitely. If you could have dinner with any person, living or dead, that you have never met before, who would it be and why?
Anyone. We're talking
Anyone, as long as you've never met them.
like just not doesn't have to be just in comedy.
No, anyone in it could be Julius Caesar. It could be, your grandfather you never met. It could be someone who's still alive right now that you just want to meet.
Well, it might be, for me, stereotypical to say it might be someone like Tecumseh,
Okay.
who was
I'm not familiar.
a First Nations leader way back in the early days. He was fighting off the U.S. Army at the time, and he was trying to unite all the tribes. They call them tribes in the States. It's not offensive in the States to say tribes. All the tribes together as a way to stand, not just as a military alliance to fight, but to stand together to fight, but also to push back. And he tried to unite all of the tribes. So someone like that would be interesting to talk to about what they were thinking. And he eventually got killed in battle, which you'd almost say was inevitable, given the U.S. was coming at them with everything they had.
I'm sure they saw him as a huge threat. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and he was a visionary, and I mean they won battles. So someone like that would be interesting.
Would you have been able to communicate with him? Do you think he spoke English?
We'd need an interpreter.
Okay.
Well, I don't know that he spoke English. Yeah, I don't know if he did. Probably, like, to really understand him, we'd probably need to speak
That's
in
a
his
very
language.
cool answer, though.
But someone like that would be really interesting, because that was the early days too, when it could have kind of gone either way. I mean, I think as settlement increased and just by a pure numbers game, it was getting even. The Indigenous people were realizing, okay, we got to find a way. Like, I mean, that's partly, where the treaties in the States came from. Like, how can we work this out?
Yeah.
It would be interesting to get his take on the times and what he was trying to do. And, he talked a lot about his vision of uniting all the tribes. Not that they'd all be the same, and that's not the point. But
what do you think he would
unity.
think of the current state of things? Probably not so great.
My guess is...
Well, obviously not the residential schools. Everyone's against that shit.
But you know what? But my guess would be he'd probably say this was probably inevitable. And this is what I was hoping we could push back against, either peacefully or militarily or both, try to find some accommodation. And I bet, who am I to say? He might say, that's what you should be doing now too. Come together, respect your differences, the way allies can, that the Cree aren't the Mohawk and the Mohawk aren't the Dene, but come together in what unites you and stand together where you can. Go your own way when it's right and when you should, when you need to, but when you can come together, there's a lot of power there.
And humans need to be coming together and uniting in a larger scale.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great answer, man. A great way to end this episode. And I thank you again for coming again. And thanks for everyone for checking it out.
It's great to be here. And I know, there's neither of us have any great mission, but this is exactly what we've been talking about in so many ways. Communicating, dialogue, engagement, learning. That's what this is about.
I consider it a privilege to be able to talk to someone with so much information and education on these topics to enlighten me where I'm clearly lacking. And it's the best. Anything anyone can do is just keep trying to connect.
Absolutely. And kudos to you for engaging in the conversation.
Yeah, man. And thanks for stopping. I'm sure you'll be back again sometime. Now that I know you live so close.
I'll be back with the sticker. For
True.
Sure.
Yeah.
Save Res Dogs.
Well, we're going to play the arcade. Thank you for watching. Bye. Oh, I got to pee, though. Give me 5 seconds.
No problems.